Erika L. Anthony, a native New Yorker, is the co-founder and executive director of Cleveland Votes, a nonpartisan democracy-building movement that works to reconstruct and strengthen power through active participation of our collective partners. Prior to her full-time role with Cleveland Votes, Erika most recently served as the executive director of the Ohio Transformation Fund. Additionally, Erika was the vice president of government relations and strategy for Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, director of business development at Oriana House, Inc., project coordinator for a pilot reentry program at the Centers for Families and Children, and held various roles in the legal sector. Erika holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the Pennsylvania State University and a master's of public administration from the College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. Erika and her husband, Brian, reside in Cleveland. They enjoy traveling, biking, and spending time with their family, friends, and puppy. Thank you.
Awesome.
Erika.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you to the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland for extending this invitation, and congratulations to you all for hosting your 9th annual meeting, which I know started earlier today. So I appreciate those that are still hanging strong after being on Zoom for a couple of hours. So the theme for today is strengthening our democracy, one act and one person at a time. So if you're like me, I'd like to know what's coming. Maybe that's the over-preparer of me. So here is where we're going to go today, our collective learning journey. And it's important to acknowledge that this is a collective learning journey. I'm not an expert. I'm very much a steward and a person that is of service and in service to our community, which means I'm always actively learning myself. So I look forward to your comments, your questions, and hearing from you all as well, which will allow me to continue to expand my knowledge. So I'll talk a little bit about who Cleveland Votes is. We'll have a land acknowledgement, talk a bit about the state of our democracy here in Northeast Ohio, as well as suggestions and ways that we can think about strengthening our democracy. We'll round out talking about ways that you can activate your civic muscle today and in the coming months. Then we'll share our contact information. Okay, I'm just gonna adjust my screen so I can see the full slideshow. So I wanna start with this land acknowledgement. We acknowledge those of the Shawnee, Miami, Erie, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Lenape, Wyandotte, Catawba, Kickapoo, Saponi, Ojibwe, Mohican, Osage, Ofo, and Haudenosaunee Confederacy who have unceded stolen lands we stand on, and the nearly 28,000 Native Americans who live in Northeast Ohio today, your neighbors, your coworkers, classmates, and community members who represent over 100 tribal nations. We also acknowledge the Native people who have been relocated from their tribal territories due to the Indian Relocation Act of 1956. And just take a moment to acknowledge and recognize those that we just honored. Thank you. So as Lynn said, this is our mission. I'm not going to repeat it, but just maybe highlight a few of the images that you see here. As we have tried to cultivate over the years, we really try to work in relationship with many, many partners, and we have so many dynamic partners here in the community. On the bottom right-hand side, this was a small event that took place during the pandemic. We had started a fellow program in 2019, right at the end of 2019, and had big visions for how we were going to work with these 4 residents in wards 4 and 6 on the east side of Cleveland that unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we had to severely shift. But they were still really creative and innovative. They ended up doing a pop-up gallery in the Buckeye neighborhood of Cleveland, where they also made available virtual and 3D guided tours that folks could view if they were not, of course, comfortable coming out in person. And they held a small set of small events in conversation with a number of folks in the community to not only talk about where we were in our country, on the heels of the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, but the ways in which that intersects with our civic fabric here in Cleveland. Immediately to the left, a gentleman that some may know, Andrew Cohn, who's held a number of hats here in our community. You see him posted outside of a local establishment. One of the ways that we were really able to still connect with people in the midst of the early pandemic was really leveraging the establishments in our community that were still open. Obviously, we had a lot of places that closed for rightful reasons, but food establishments and grocery stores and gas stations, these were unfortunately places that had to stay open to be able to provide service to residents in our community. And we leveraged that, and we talked to local business owners and asked if we could, provide them materials about voting, provide them materials about the census, and also leverage their outdoor space so we could all remain healthy and safe. So our vision is our collective work will our collective work will power a transformation towards a more liberated future. We offer continued access to tools that will produce increased efforts in civic education, engagement, and advocacy. We will continue to work intentionally to amplify the voices of our neighbors, ensuring we have a more informed, participatory, and cohesive community. Just last year, around this time, actually, we were very successful in completing a strategic planning process that will serve as a roadmap for our organization over the next 4 years, or now 3 years, ending in 2026. Not much about what we're doing is changing. The process just really allowed us to reflect and refine the ways in which we engage in our community. And we've organized our work into 4 pillars: realizing equitable civic engagement, shifting power, movement building capacity, and grant making. If you're interested in learning more, there will be a link in this PDF PowerPoint that you'll receive after today's presentation. Obviously, I'm not here alone, even though team members are off, rightfully so, on a Saturday, although I do have one team member working today. But this is the amazing Cleveland Votes team. Myself and Crystal Bryant are the co-founders, and Crystal still serves as an advisor and deep supporter of this organization. We have Lee Gates, who serves as our senior strategist, Robin Turner, our civic engagement strategist, Brianna, our communications and narrative strategist, Tasha, our operations administrator, and then we have a democracy fellow, Yugen, as well as Sydney, our intern, who will be wrapping up her semester in a week. But we've had her on board since last summer. All right, so this may be a loaded question, but if you are able, I would love for you to drop your responses in the chat. How do you feel about the state of our democracy? And I'll just give folks a moment so I can see what may populate in the chat. Don't be shy. I know you have feelings about the state of our democracy.
I think the chat might be disabled for some of us.
Oh, it's disabled. Okay. Well, if we're able, are folks able to come off mute, Nadia? Or because we're live stream, we can't?
I think they can, but I'm sure that when we get to the Q&A portion, I'm sure you will be hearing a lot of things from our members.
Okay.
So.
All right. Sounds good. We'll keep it moving. We'll reflect on this question, and I would love to hear responses when we get down to the Q&A. So when I think about how I feel, often those feelings tend to be sometimes anger, sometimes anxiety, sometimes frustration. And those are rightful feelings, and we have to honor those feelings. And I think part of being in community, working with and building relationships with community members, is to be radically honest about how you feel. These are personal journeys, right? We have a larger democracy system that governs our nation and governs our state and our local communities. But at the end of the day, we are individuals making up these communities, right? So I will say sometimes when I see the headlines, I am frustrated. These are just a few headlines that have popped up in local newspapers here in Northeast Ohio, but they don't paint, I think, quite the story that myself, the Cleveland Votes team, and many of our partners get to see on a daily basis, right? When I read these headlines, they feel very doom and gloom. And that's not to be naive, that's not to, dismiss the fact that we have a lot of work to do. But I also think that we need to spend time really looking inward about, not only our own personal journey, but the ways in which we see democracy showing up in ways that maybe do not reflect these particular headlines. Just going further on some of the recent research that we have conducted, a few years ago, we partnered with Policy Matters Ohio, which is a local think tank, and a national firm, Hit Strategies. This was coming off the heels of the 2020 election, which we know was a challenging election, largely in part due to the pandemic that year. Many of us were forced to reimagine what it meant to engage members of our community when all of us had to maintain our distance and be safe. But we saw, resounding turnout across our nation and even here in Ohio. But in certain cities like Cleveland, that turnout was lower. So we were curious to know and better understand what was sort of the temperament of Clevelanders and how they felt about civic engagement and voting. And these are just a few quotes. I won't read them all. And I'm happy, again, the full study is linked here in the slide deck if you're interested in viewing more of the responses. But at a high level, what we heard from respondents was that they lack trust in information. Those may seem pretty basic, but they are incredibly fundamental to the ways in which we think about engaging voters in our community. Most specifically, as you can see on the far left-hand side, voters indicated that they were not apathetic, which tends to be one of the ways that folks are categorized when they're not engaging in the electoral process, but they lacked information. We also heard that voters, actually have deep concern about what is happening in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in our community at large, but they lack trust with elected officials and really are unsure whether or not those elected officials understand their values, understand what is a priority to them, and are they willing to, really advance the goals of our collective community. I think another important element of our journey in realizing a more equitable democracy is acknowledging the historical factors that have led us to where we are today. On the far left-hand side, we see an image of voters in line trying to register for the upcoming election in Selma, Alabama in February of 1965. And I remember talking in 2020, having a conversation with my mom and some other folks that are of more mature age. And I had read an article which prompted me to see this image. And, I had a conversation about, what was her experience? What was she feeling at that time? What were, my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles and my cousins? And, she expressed frustration. She said, we have done a lot to advocate for more equitable access to the ballot. And she said, it's really disheartening to see some of the really violent acts that are being inflicted upon our community now in 2020, and now we can say even in 2023. On the far right, folks may recall this image. This was one of the early voting days, October 24th of 2020, down at the Board of Elections, immediately to the west of the Board of Elections. There is a ramp, the Chester Avenue ramp that takes you off 90 to get off to Chester Avenue. And I remember top of the morning, I think I was just getting my coffee. A few folks started to text me this picture and a few others. And they're like, have you heard? Have you seen? Have you heard? Have you seen? I'm like, no, I'm still kind of waking up. What's going on? And soon, came to find out that folks were lined up. They were enthusiastic. They were excited to cast their ballot, but they were also literally putting their lives at risk by standing on a ramp of a highway, which we felt was unacceptable. And this image is not unique. We saw images just here in Ohio. I had friends down in Columbus and Franklin County also sending very similar images. And just seeing these two pictures in contrast, you know, while we have made progress, we also know that history tends to repeat itself. And again, this was a really unfortunate situation for voters. The next day, Cleveland Votes had an organized event in partnership with Samiria Rice, the mother of Tamir Rice, because Tamir would have been 18 that year. So we had worked with her and the foundation to create a youth-oriented voter guide to honor him and honor what would have been his 18th birthday and the first year that he would have been able to vote. So we had organized this event. We got coffee and hot chocolate and, you know, some snacks for voters. And I remember the day pretty vividly because I think every form of precipitation fell down, which is not uncommon for the fall time here in Ohio. But we had rain, we had hail, we had snow, we had sleet. It was an atrocious day weather-wise, and the line was equally as long that day. And I remember on the corner of Chester and 30th seeing a mom and a young child. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. And I literally pulled her out of line and I said, this is unacceptable. This baby should not, you know, have to, you know, be in these elements of this weather. And brought her to the front and kindly asked the Board of Election officials if she could come in, because I just felt it was unsafe. One, because she was literally on a corner, and the weather, you know, not that the weather was best for everyone, but I really felt for a young child that was just really unacceptable. So we handed out coffee and hot chocolate, and folks were really appreciative, and we just kept thanking them and encouraging them to stay online because it was such an important day for them to cast their ballot. Voter suppression shows up in many other ways. I won't go through all of these, being cognizant of time, but we have seen just here in the state of Ohio, you know, multiple acts of voter purging. You know, we're not opposed to voter maintenance. We think that obviously our voter rolls should be accurate, but we are opposed to, you know, purging voters that have consistently voted, which we have seen happen time and time again. On the far right, you see an image that relates to digital redlining. If you have not heard of this term, many people have heard of redlining as it relates to housing and what happened in the 1930s, and in many ways continues to remanifest itself as well. But digital redlining means that there are parts of our community that are essentially dead zones. It's not that folks don't have a computer or they don't have a smartphone or they don't have the ability to connect to the internet, but they literally don't have broadband connectivity. This was an issue, again, going back to 2020, not just for voters, but for many students. Obviously, many schools were closing and students were forced to work from home. And this was an issue as it related to them gaining access, you know, to their materials for their classes. And this was an issue for us in March and April of 2020, when for rightful reasons, we went from an in-person primary election to a virtual vote by mail election, and many people needed to gain access to download the form and print the form. And we know that not just in that case, but in many other instances, we have tried to register voters, partners have tried to register voters on the field, in the, you know, on the ground, and literally could not connect to the internet. On the bottom left, we also see an example of dis and misinformation, which is not a new concept or phenomenon, but we have seen a dramatic increase of this occurring right here in our state, in our community, and of course, across the nation, where we know that persons of color, particularly Black and Latino voters, are being flooded with disinformation. I remember a few years ago, one of our partners, the Ohio Voter Fund, came to us. They had residents in East Cleveland asking them about a hot card that they had received in the mail. And that hot card had essentially served as a reminder for the election, but it had the wrong date on that. So we know that there are blatant acts to reduce and or minimize persons of color, particularly, from equitably accessing the election day. So, not to remain in the doom and gloom, we know as an organization that to strengthen our democracy, this requires one act and one person at a time. That may not seem like it's enough, but for us, that has been our strategy over the years. We understand large scale, gargantuan efforts, which are equally important and needed, but sometimes it can be that simple act of connecting with one person, one event, and really making a ripple effect and impact on our community. I'll just highlight a few of these here on the screen. On the top right, this was an event, Cleveland Fresh Fest, which occurs in the Kinsman area, in the central area on Kinsman. It's been hosted for the last couple of years. We had volunteers out registering voters at this particular event. On the bottom right, again, going back to 2020, we had to get really creative. So we had a friend of the organization who was interested in working with us to help amplify messages around the election and census. He's a DJ, his daughter is a DJ. So he would hold these essentially sets and do, creative things like have trivia night, but intermingled, in that trivia night was information and almost like messages and commercials about voting and census. So really thinking creatively about, leveraging your network. It's not always sort of the traditional democracy builder or organizer or activist. It's really thinking about who has a network and who has access to people that maybe you don't have access to. So for us, we refer to this quote often. This is a report that came out from the Kirwan Institute a number of years ago now, but it talks about that fundamentally equitable civic engagement is about leveraging the power dynamics of place, giving voice to those that have been previously alienated and excluded from civic processes. This is particularly important for us. We are a Black woman founded and now Black women-led organization. We understand what our role is in this broader ecosystem. We know the ways in which that we have been targeted and prioritized, from folks that don't want to necessarily see and or hear our voices. And there are many other folks in our community that feel that way. So it's really important that we elevate and prioritize their voices. Civic engagement must be understood as a constant, sustained practice that outlives election cycles and stretches beyond voting or formal channels of citizen input, right? So what does that mean? We have a few elections a year. We should have 2, but we generally have 3 or 4, it seems like these last couple of years. But there are many other days in between that, right? So how are we engaging in folks on the issues that are of most concern and or most pressing for them in their communities? And how do we then connect that to the voting process? There is not, I don't believe, an issue that community members are facing that does not in some way or shape or form connect back to our elections or our electoral process. And as stewards and individuals that are in service in the community, it is our job essentially to make sure we're making that connection. Again, going back to, infusing creative methods. Last year, we celebrated the civic holiday Vote Early Day. We decided to do an event called Pull Up to the Polls, where we literally just sat up shop right on East 30th, just north of the Board of Elections. And we had a few partners that you could see listed here on the table or on the screen, that had different tables. We had food, we had swag, we had coffee, we had snacks, we had a kids station. One of our teammates created kid-friendly ballots, so she made it obviously very cute for the kids and, had them voting on their favorite flavor of ice cream and other cute stickers and things of that nature. As we were in the midst of planning this, we had a couple of the local cycling groups reach out to us and say, hey, how can we help? And we're like, you tell us how you can help. They're like, we're going to organize a ride, which they did. So they organized a ride and had a few folks starting on the east side and made their way and not just, had a ride, but also ultimately cast their ballot that day on Vote Early Day. All right, so I'm going to start moving a little faster because I know we have want to be able to answer some questions. So I have a few case studies, just again to kind of elevate some of these points. So the first one being meeting the needs of the community, right? Even though in our priority is, strengthening our democracy, strengthening our ecosystem, we also can't be immune to the fact that people are thinking about and being faced with a lot of challenges. So in 2020, we know obviously with the pandemic, a few organizations came together to say, we want to make sure that residents of our community are safe and have the PPE that they need. As that sort of concept started to come together, we realized that this was an opportunity not only to give out free masks, but also to distribute information about elections and the election and census and COVID safety, which ultimately resulted in us creating kits for members of Cleveland and East Cleveland, prioritizing those that we felt were maybe not being prioritized by the official channels in our community. And ultimately, we were able to distribute 77,000 masks to residents of our community. Another case example is thinking about ways that we can activate through advocacy and organizing, right? So whether it's voting yes on issue 24, which took place in 2021, making sure that we had equal rights for our homeless and houseless populations, or in the top right, fighting around HJR1 earlier this year, or supporting our AAPI members of the community to make sure that folks are not allowing there to be acts of hate, towards our AAPI population. We also know that democracy shows up beyond elections, as I indicated before. So things like participatory budgeting, Clevelanders for public comment, Cleveland documenters are all great examples of the ways in which we are connecting with community members to show them how they can exercise their power. So speaking of power, you have it. We want you to exercise it. These are just a few images of different ways that we've connected in our community, whether it's the bottom right, one of the images from our Pull Up to the Polls event, bottom kind of center, engaging with some international leaders coming into Cleveland. There are many different ways that we can talk about and exercise our power. So I'm actually going to skip this because I know we are close on time. So what can you do today? There are many ways, and I started to hear a little bit of this conversation as I was coming on to the meeting today. So I'll just quickly run through these. And again, this PowerPoint will be available so you can access all the links. Obviously, we want to continue to educate people about HB 458 and what is acceptable as it relates to ID and some of the other nuances of this legislation. If you are inclined, we encourage you to raise awareness and help collect signatures for the Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom campaign. We are really pleased to share just yesterday, we publicly announced the People's Budget. This is formerly the Participatory Budgeting Coalition. We are taking our issue to the ballot this fall, and we will be launching next Friday, our official kickoff, and we welcome folks to join us and help collect signatures. And of course, we need to educate people about SJ2 and the August special election. While there are a number of pending lawsuits, we don't know what the outcome of those lawsuits are going to be. So until then, we want to educate people about what this means. There's a campaign website listed here, as well as a social media toolkit. If you're interested in getting materials like pledge cards and other informational materials, again, that will be available through these links once you receive this PowerPoint. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. Have tremendous gratitude for you all again inviting me in today. If I can answer any questions beyond today's annual meeting, I could be contacted here. If you're interested in receiving our newsletter, feel free to reach out through our media email account, as well as follow us on social media. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing so I can answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that excellent presentation. We all look forward to continuing to work with Cleveland Votes, and I'm sure we're going to see you at quite a few of these events. We do have time for questions. People have their hands up right now. Let's see, Michael Barron, your hand is up.
Thank you. Erika, would you please talk to us about the August 8th election and the role that Cleveland Votes might be taking in that election? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Great to hear from you. So obviously this is all happening rapidly fast. So we're still kind of wrapping our arms around it. But at a high level, we are opposed to SJR2 and HJR1 and have been advocating against those joint resolutions from earlier this year, really going back to last year through the early part of this year. So, going back to our tagline, educate, connect, and empower. So it's really important that people are aware of what SJR2 means. I know there's been a lot of commentary that, this particular joint resolution is, blatantly focused on suppressing the repro bill's ability, or repro ballot initiative, excuse me, ability to pass. But I think we also need to zoom out. That is definitely a target. So we don't want to minimize that, but we need to acknowledge that this is a constitutional amendment, which has not occurred since 1912. We are in 2023. So this has not occurred since 1912. This will not only impact just the upcoming ballot initiatives that we see here in 2023, but this will impact future ballot initiatives, citizen-led ballot initiatives. So for us, it's really important that we educate people about what it is, help them, gain access to how they can combat and or educate constituents or neighbors or family members. As I said in that PowerPoint, I have links to being able to access materials. Ohio Voice and others around the state have put together some pledge cards. So if you're already out registering people, it would be really great if you can also, provide them a pledge card. So again, we're kind of formalizing our plans still, but at a bare minimum, educating people and making sure that we're connecting with the constituents that we engage with to make sure that they are aware.
Okay, thank you. Nadia, your hand's up.
This is actually more of a comment than a question, but just as I'm sure you probably know, the league is also opposing this issue on the ballot. So I just wanted to let you know that, as the League of Women Voters, we are happy to work with Cleveland Votes on this issue. I think it's important that all the groups that are opposing this do the best we can to work together to fight this. So I just wanted to let you know that, and let us know if there's anything we can do with your organization to achieve that.
Thanks, Nadia. And I will say, on one of our people's budget calls last week, again, sort of in the spirit of brainstorming ideas, one of the things that came up was some sort of progressive drive-through. So we go back to 2020, we were doing a lot of drive-through events because that was the safest we could do, to connect with people. But we were kind of imagining this event where people could drive through and sign the repro ballot initiative. They could sign the people's budget initiative. They could get information about the August 8th election and kind of give people the information in one full swoop. So I definitely see, over the course of the next couple of weeks, a lot of these campaigns collaborating, right? Because it all of it impacts us in some shape or form, whether or not, we're not an explicit reproductive rights organization, but we are co-conspirators and allies, of course. And the August 8th election impacts all of us, regardless of what your issue is. So I definitely see opportunities to collaborate, and I appreciate the offer to think about that, Nadia.
Definitely. Mary Ann Barnes, hand is up.
Could you clarify exactly what has not happened since 1912? I'm a little confused because certainly we've had referendums since then. I'm not sure what.
Sure. So having this type of constitutional amendment changing the threshold for passage rate has not happened since 1912. And I can actually, there was a good article yesterday that I was reading where Jen Miller from the statewide league was talking about this. Her and I were on a panel. I was not aware, admittedly, to that particular fact. And her and I were on a panel with former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I see the chat's disabled, but I can follow up and send the link when I send the PowerPoint to give more information about that particular statistic.
Thanks. Meg Weingart.
Yeah, I wonder what role for vote by mail, if that would be especially good to a strategy for increasing voter turnout for this August 8th election, if you're focusing on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we have and or our partners have specifically called that out. I think vote by mail still continues to be a challenge for some populations, for reasons like you need to, print the requests and then mail that request and or drop it off to the Board of Election. And if you're not in close proximity to the Board of Election, and or don't have transportation to get to the Board of Election and or don't have stamps, that could be a barrier. But I will say, groups that I know you all are aware of, like NOVA, have always been really steadfast advocates on vote by mail, in part because it is also a great way to be able to track and then follow up with those voters, to give them reminders to turn out to vote. So I think a combination of letter writing campaigns, which I know is part of the statewide effort around vote no on August 8th election. I think that personal note. So if you were thinking about sending vote by mail applications to a set of constituents that you all have, in your database, I would definitely include. And again, the vote no folks are already creating material, so it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel. You will just be able to have access to that information. That would be my encouragement. So a both and, including a personal note, encouraging them to vote no along with the vote by mail application.
Yeah,
Thanks,
definitely.
Meg.
Well, thank you. Michael, bearing your hands up
Yeah.
again. I don't think anyone.
Michael, you only get one question.
Come on. Could we talk a little bit about turnout? Your report after the last election was excellent. And could you just really quickly summarize some of the action steps that all of us can work on to improve turnout in the next election?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it goes back to some of the things that toward the end I kind of started to speed through because I had my little timer going here, but it's really thinking about not just those weeks leading up to the election, but really challenging ourselves to think about how are we connecting with folks throughout the year, and what are the issues that we're connecting with folks throughout the year, right? Again, I can just run off a litany of things that I know Clevelanders are waking up thinking about, whether it's equitable access to education, to housing, to healthcare, right? All these different ways that we are not showing up in the ways that we should be showing up for residents in our community. And we need to go to them. We need to go to those organizations, right? We don't need to think that we can take all those issues on as singular organizations, but we need to be strategic and thoughtful, right? So again, I use 2020 because it was the year I felt like as an organization, we really stretched our imaginations because we had no choice but to stretch our imaginations. But doing things like partnering with the various institutions that were holding food drives, right? People were unfortunately in dire need of access to food. And it was simple requests. Can we just have a table, and not just us, I say the we, and I often say we, it's like our partners also, but can we have a table set up so we can educate people about the upcoming election? And it's really thinking strategically how you can place yourself in places that people are already going. Way back when I first met our co-founder, Crystal Bryant, she would always say, go to the people, like work smarter, not harder, right? It's hard to bring people to you or get people to come to you. So really thinking about, particularly as we come soon to the summer season, there are so many outdoor opportunities, right? And again, we've been, sort of shunned from being able to do these things the last couple of years. So really thinking about how you get and connect with people. People want to be in relationship, right? So if we only focus on things like, are you turning out the vote, but not genuinely developing a relationship with the residents in our community, they're not stupid, right? And like, they're not ignorant. They know when they're being treated like a transaction, right? And we know that this has happened for far too long. And that's what a lot of the research has shown us, is that Clevelanders feel like they have been treated like a transaction. People only come to them when they want something, when they need something. And after that, that's it. They ghost, they're gone, they're not engaging with them. So it's the long game, but we really have to think about how we build deeper relationships. And the example that I often use coming off the 2020 election, immediately after, Georgia's, amazing turnout, and then their special election, everybody's like, we need to go to Georgia. We need to talk to the organizers there. And we're like, yes, and their strategy did not happen overnight. Stacey Abrams was very, very vocal, and I'm grateful that she was vocal to say, this is not about me. This is about the folks that run these organizations throughout the state. Yes, I've played a critical role in that, but acknowledging that it wasn't just her, but also like, this is 10 plus years in the making, right? So we also have to be willing to make that type of investment. And I will say, part of that investment of us as practitioners is also making sure that the funding is sustainable, right? We can't do this work if we don't have sustainable funding. So it's also a call of action to, local funders and national funders to think about what does it mean to invest multi-year in organizations, because the cycle up and cycle down does not allow us to build those genuine relationships in our community. Lynn, you're on mute if you're talking.
Sorry, Mary Garvey, your hand is up.
Yes, regarding amendments to the US Constitution, I just looked it up and I think 1912 was the last constitutional convention. There have been amendments since then, but.
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely been amendments. Yes. Sorry if I
wasn't clear if that was what you were saying, so.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, there's definitely been many. And that's the point of what I'm saying, is that we've had multiple amendments on both sides of the aisle, right? So this is not, not to be made. I know we're a nonpartisan organization. I'm going to stay in my lane, but it's to acknowledge that amendments serve the rights of the citizens of this state, period. And the attack is making it obviously a very partisan attack, right? So just acknowledging that, yes, we've had dozens upon dozens of amendments occur in our state, and we need to have those, right? That is the right of citizens of this nation.
We need to have those casinos.
Right.
Sorry. I think there was a constitutional amendment, and that's how we got casinos.
Right.
Oh.
Erika, the Board of Elections, Cuyahoga County is looking to move their headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
Does Cleveland Votes have a position or any point of view as to where they should be moving?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think we're not involved in any shape or any formal capacity. I think my only request would be something that's a little bit more accessible, like from an outdoor space standpoint. As I referenced that Vote Early Day event that we did, we were literally on a sidewalk. That's all we had, like, available real estate to us. And we look at other boards of election across the state. That day, I actually got a call from a partner in Columbus who was also doing an event, and they had a bouncy table, or not table, bouncy machine, the big bouncy thing for kids. And I was like, y'all have that much space? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, we couldn't even fit a half a bouncy thing on this sidewalk. So I know it might seem simple, but just something that could be more community oriented, so that organizations could have more events on site. I mean, I do think it's accessible from the sense of like being able to drive through and drive out. But I think just a little bit more real estate would be nice for a new location.
Okay, excellent. Anyone else had their hand up? Okay, well, with that, round of applause for sure for Erika. No question about that. I really want to thank you for this wonderful presentation. It's given us, time for reflection and to think. I look forward to the slideshow that you're going to be, sending us all. That'll be tremendous to go through that more carefully. I also want to thank our membership who attended this meeting and made the 9th annual meeting a success. As you could probably surmise, this is going to be a very, very busy year. It will be all hands on deck. I look forward to meeting with all of you at some point, hopefully at a voter registration table or going door to door or something like that. So with that being said, Nadia, thank you again.
Oh, I think Erika wanted to say something else.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you all again for allowing me to join your meeting. I want to thank Eleanor, who initially reached out, and we did some of the early planning, and Michael in the last week or so kind of doing some final logistics. But thank you all. I hope it's been a really fruitful and exhilarating annual meeting for you this morning. Thank you.